Hello and welcome to the Auto Remarketing Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Overby, Senior Editor of Auto Remarketing. My guests today are Vish, Talreja, and AJ Philippakis, who are the co-founders of Cord. And Cord is an electric vehicle insights product that showcases essential EV data on vehicle detail pages. And their goal is to educate buyers and transform curious shoppers into confident EV owners. And right now, they're working with dealers and dealer groups and a couple others, folks like Volvo Cars Richmond and the Dilawri Automotive Group. And we're going to talk with them about Cord's mission to help dealers educate consumers and ultimately sell more EVs. But first, guys, Vish, AJ, thank you for joining the show and great to see you.
Yes, thank you, Joe. Good to see you again.
Absolutely. We'll start from the top here. What was the origin story of Cord, and what was the spark to launching this company?
Yeah, our mission in a sense and kind of the origin was, to build intelligent tools to empower dealers to sell EVs easier. And that was kind of rooted in our broad advocacy for, the promotion of electric vehicle adoption, both for kind of, promoting, decarbonization efforts, as well as being advocates for the development of, electric vehicles in North America, both from a jobs perspective and from a industrialization. And where we saw, that mission became kind of what Cord is, which is making software for dealers to make selling EVs easier. And it started with a problem that we saw in the market, and the problem that we saw was that consumer interest in EVs is high, but we saw the knowledge level was low, and that led to an information gap as we see it. And that information gap we saw was leading to buyer hesitation, to lost sales. This was winnable deals that were being lost by dealerships due to this information gap. And the way that we look at it is that in our backgrounds, I think Vish can talk a little bit about his, is that we come from the startup space from technology, but also in automotive. And for example, I had worked at a large OEM for several years working on software for their electric vehicle emerging and electric vehicle segment, and saw this information gap there as well. And Vish, maybe you want to talk a little bit about your background.
Yeah, very quickly. From my perspective, from an automotive standpoint, prior to Cord, I was actually building a marketplace for vehicles to be purchased by dealers from consumers. So it was a consumer to dealer sort of a marketplace. And one of the big gaps over there was, there were a lot of EVs, especially here in British Columbia, with Vancouver having like tons of EVs. And dealers were buying these cars sight unseen. And there was no information on EVs on VDPs, like technical data, range related data, battery health type of information. So that was also one of the big factors in kind of, building Cord. And also, as a personal side, lots of experience in the tech space, especially machine learning, AI, machine vision. So those are all things that are kind of, gearing up into Cord.
Well,
Yeah.
oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, expanding on that is that, being in that industry of in the automotive industry in that sense, we were seeing that information gap. And a lot of it was because, we see EVs as fundamentally different products with different technical underpinnings. So when we see the transition from ICE to EV is not just being kind of a new vehicles in the market, but a fundamental shift, not unlike, what flip phones were for smartphones. And when we saw that, we thought that meant that, this means that how do you look at software-defined vehicles or connected vehicles and all the capabilities that they have, and then how do you merchandise those? How do you convey those to customers in a way that reflects how those products work? As many folks know that in the legacy automotive world, often vehicles have their SOP dates or when they're shipped, and a lot of the technology is kind of frozen as it comes off the line. Whereas when you look at a software or many EVs, which are software defined or connected vehicles, have certain capabilities as they're shipped, but then they continue to receive those over time. And many of those extend the value of vehicles, and we think are important kind of underlying components to involve in your merchandising as an automotive retailer. And part of how we designed our product, we can talk a little bit about how we've done that, is to convey that. How do you reimagine merchandising understanding these kind of fundamentally different products in the market.
So how does the consumer interact with it? Do they see it basically on the information on the dealer's VDP?
Yeah, yeah. The way they'll see it is that so our insights module is embedded on every VDP, and directly right under the classic VP under the image is kind of front and center. And that the way we design the insight module is kind of in twofold. One of them is it'll have a series of information bytes. Those information bytes are directly traceable to the common questions that somebody would be when they're looking to buy an EV vehicle or they're looking to learn more about that. Now, categorically, those can be things like, how can I learn about the savings and benefits of an EV? How can I learn about range and charging? And inside of those, savings will have information on fuel, on maintenance savings, on carbon, and in range and charging, will have everything from battery health. If it's new, setting expectations how the battery works. If it's a pre-owned vehicle, the expectations on the remaining useful life or battery health as it is. We talk about weather impact on vehicles, and many of the things that I think that people may have misconceptions or potentially have gaps in knowledge will express in these information bytes. And many of them are taking what can be common, complex topics, but transposing into something that's simpler to understand in the purchase process on the VDP. And then encapsulating all that, we have, I think, as you mentioned earlier, was a conversational agent named Zoe. And for those personas that want to go perhaps a little bit beyond the information bytes, you can engage in a conversation with Zoe and go deeper to understanding the vehicle, its benefits. And Zoe, unlike a traditional GPT that you can ask questions to, Zoe's trained to speak specifically to that VIN. So let's say we were looking at a VDP with a 2023 Mustang Mach-E. When she answers questions relative to what a buyer's asking for, it's going to be specifically about that VIN. The range is going to be relative to the range of that vehicle. It'll all the attributes of that vehicle, and I think that's one of the things that distinguishes us in terms of the depth that we go into on those pages. So, Joe, as you mentioned, yes, the consumer will engage in our insights directly on each VDP relative to that VIN.
And as far as, I imagine especially for things like battery health or, just intricate details about a specific vehicle, how do you go about gathering that information? Are there outside resources that you used? Is that something your team gathers?
Yeah, Vish, you want to tackle that?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And, there are several data sources, right? There is no one way to do it. So when we were building Cord, the backstory is that, I was looking for a vehicle, and I was actually, looking at 15 different browser windows for information, regarding range, regarding, certain information from OEMs, what they were publishing. But because I was buying a used vehicle, when you go to an OEM site, it's very hard to find backdated data, right? So it was incredibly hard to pull that together. So long story short, there were like 15 windows with lots of pieces of information. And this is me, a technical guy trying to buy an EV. Now imagine a consumer that doesn't have that kind of level of experience with EVs. So just like that, on Cord side, there are several data sources, OEMs being one of them. There are many, data points that are outside of the OEMs from like range and test related information. We have battery manufacturing data from like Cattle and Panasonic, the guys that are actually building the battery packs inside, and a whole lot of information that's kind of flowing in from vehicles as well as from charging data points. So we're also looking at information from a data exchange that can happen from a vehicle into a charger. So there are many facets that are being deployed over here to kind of build the model on which we're working.
So you guys recently announced that a partnership with Talreja, which is, I believe, Canada's largest dealer group. And
Yeah.
I saw on your website that you have partnerships with other dealers and dealer groups, but also the company Dealer On. You have a partnership with them. How do the partnerships with the dealers differ from the partnership with Dealer On?
Yeah. Good question. I could probably take the first part. You know, Dealeron, as we know, is a large platform, leading platform here in the United States, and they really recently had this, fantastic initiative of releasing their on marketplace, which is a series of point solution integrated marketplace. And we love that platform philosophy because it extends values for automotive retailers and having certain solutions they can pick and integrate in a composable solution format. So we are very proud that we achieved kind of a trusted partner status on their marketplace, and they have a series of initiatives to push that marketing in the next few months. And in that case, as you mentioned, Joe, it's a one of the channels of going to market, which is being available to for discovery to solve EV retail and merchandising in the dealer on marketplace. And we like the promise that will show. And then Vish, do you want to talk a little bit about Dilawri, of course, as an
Yeah, I
automotive?
can jump in on the Dilawri bit. So Dilawri, obviously, the largest over here, and we're super excited because, they actually completely get it. They realize that, merchandising and actually bringing customers on the, front door through the internet is actually a very smart way of actually engaging with them with this frontline data. So the way that actually happened was, we started working with one dealership first, which was Volvo Cars of Richmond, which is a name that you mentioned earlier, and that is actually part of the Dilawri group. So that actually elevated some of the data that we had and took it broadly across all Dilawri stores. So an auto group like Dilawri has 83 locations at the moment, and over 62 of them sell EVs, which is a huge percentage if you look at it from North American data of auto groups versus how many sell EVs. So it's super exciting for us. And we're again, front and center on every VDP, powering up over 1,200 EVs with our insights and data, and Zoe's engaged on every single one of them. So that is, yeah, it's super exciting for us.
So as you go about educating the consumer, what have you found have been some of the obstacles or concerns about EVs that might keep them on the sidelines? What are some of the common fears that you guys kind of hope to quell?
Yeah, I think we could probably answer that in a couple of ways. One of them is what led into how we designed the product to address those
Mhm.
fears or concerns. And also, Vish, I think it would be great to we can provide some examples of like some of the conversations that are
Yeah.
taking place to quantify some of the things we're seeing. But the way we designed the original module was to address what we were seeing in the market, which is concerns around you see in reports like anxiety, battery health, climate concerns like cold weather concerns. So a big deal of our modules are designed to address those specifically. But we don't just take a approach from like addressing like fear, but we also kind of lead in with like the value and the benefits of the EV, the things that they may not know. There are things that people have heard, but there are things that may not have been showcased, and so we try to highlight those as well. And I think Vish, we're always analyzing data to better understand like the interaction with customers, so that we can bring that intelligence back to our software, but also provide that intelligence to our automotive retailing partners to give them that insight. I think Vish, we have some data we were looking at earlier. Do you want to speak to?
Yeah, no, it's interesting because there's obviously lots of places online where people talk about, okay, these are the main concerns. But I tell my friends, and obviously in a very joking way, that we built Zoe because I'm basically trying to replace myself in my friends group, because they're asking me all these same questions that, hey, I'm looking to buy this EV, and can you tell me what's the acceleration on this one, or what's the fuel savings, how much of range can I expect? And I was like, okay, I keep hearing all of this stuff, and you just go talk to Zoe, right? So I'm actually getting traffic onto the lorry. But we hear the top, and there are many questions. So the top three that come to mind, as AJ mentioned, range and charging related. So what's very specific to Canadian weather? Like, okay, BC has mild temperature. What can I expect from vampire drain, for example? Things like that. So we use complex terms like vampire drain and make it super simple in terms of actionable data. The second is around fuel economy. Like, okay, what is the fuel savings, but also what is the miles per gallon equivalent? Like, how am I getting some of this data and what is that range? And sometimes these are really interesting data points, especially for people that are converting from gas to electric, because, they look at that metric in the gas ecosystem. And the third one we've seen from the chatter is comparisons with gas equivalents around many things like towing capacity, for example. There's also this kind of myth that EVs can't tow, and then we show them, oh, there's a Rivian that can tow like pretty much everything. So there are these kind of questions, that kind of bubble in,
And
it's interesting. Yeah.
it's funny, Joe, jumping in there's that I'm a basketball fan, and the more I've observed Zoe, I've started to think of her as kind of a player coach in the
Okay.
sense that, Zoe's on the front line having conversations with customers, kind of guiding them through this discovery, to obviously this is all on the business outcome of driving sales. But in addition to that, it's our perspective, and we're going to be evolving our product tools that even frontline sales teams can engage with Zoe to get quick insights into vehicles that they can use in the sales process. So she's a player coach in that front line, but also potentially coaching, setting examples of like the types of responses for sales teams to give them more to engage with their customers in the sales process. So we're
Yeah, because
excited
that's an
about it.
important point, right? The education gap is actually on both sides of the sale, right? And that's what we're solving.
Yeah, I mean, that was gonna be another question I had is what have been some of the um either hesitation or like concerns dealers might have about selling EVs?
I can talk from my perspective on dealing with them. I don't think the concern is about selling EVs or inventory. It's about data, because I'll give you a simple example. I was at a dealership, and when we were talking about our insights to be embedded, we had a very simple one around incentives. When incentives were actually there in BC, there were tax incentives on sale, and those have now gone. So that simple compute on the price of the vehicle and a tax rebate was hard for dealerships to do. So these dealers were actually manually computing and typing that value in the VDP. Now, nobody's going to read that voluminous text that's on VDPs, right? So just bringing simple pieces of that, we were able to change the conversation. So to come back to your question, I think the hesitation isn't about EVs per se. I think it is about how to sell the EV, because a lot of times they don't have the right information, they don't have data, and they don't have the right tools to sell the EV. And I think that's where we're seeing an opportunity exist, and that's why we exist. So that's sort of been my sort of you know at least experience with the dealerships.
Yeah, and
Well,
I think we're still discovering as we engage in conversation with retailers, how they're approaching kind of EV sales. We certainly know that when you look at pre-owned EVs, there is a lot of growth over the past year in terms of EVs coming out to market. And some dealers have like low amounts of inventory for EVs, and some are really just kind of pulling in as many as they can. And I think, Joe, you may have seen this in the industry. We talk to folks who say that, well, they're identifying internal champions, kind of EV specialists of a certain level of knowledge that can kind of take front line and answering some of these questions. And we love that. And we think it's an example of, but they must scale that over time, because as inventory grows and demand's growing, that needs to be scaled. And we see ourselves as at Cord as part of solving that, right? Making it more operationally efficient such that they can, take on and sell in an easier way. And the thing about it is that there's a lot of technology like underpinning what we do, but we are rooted in our customer needs, right? How our customers measure success. So all of our tools are driven to business outcomes, like how are you going to move inventory, how are you going to reduce time on lot, how are you going to increase customer satisfaction and transparency. So we listen to that and drive those through our product.
Yeah.
so AJ, you're in Washington State. Fish, you're in Vancouver. How did the EV markets between the U.S. and Canada compare, be it consumer appetite, charging infrastructure? Um, what have you guys noticed similarities and differences between EV markets in both countries?
I can speak to, what I've seen in the US market, which has been a bit more stable in Canada, is has been obviously the past few months have been a bit of a dynamic environment when it comes to EVs in the United States with regards, regulatory or administrative perspectives and advocates. So I think there's been a lot of up and down, and oftentimes it's hard to track. But as I've zoomed out, I still seem to see that ongoing consumer interest in EVs, which is steadily growing, which we're excited about. In Canada, I think there is strong advocacy for EV adoption, and we are connected. I think Vish, you could talk to some of the organizations that were connected there too for
Yeah.
EV advocacy, right?
Yeah, and definitely from a Canadian standpoint, especially in Vancouver, where I am, every third car around me is an EV, and sometimes like and we're both Tesla drivers, so I'm driving my car, and then there are like five other Teslas like right around, and I'm like, okay, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And I feel like okay, and environmentally that's good, but there is no differentiation. But that's changing, I feel. Like even with with the wins with Tesla and being on the forefront of innovation, there are many other brands that have come on board. And now you're seeing diversity. You're seeing Polestars out there. You're seeing a lot of General Motors vehicles out there. There are the Cadillacs, the new Lyrics, that they're all on the road. And I think that diversity is driving more public interest because they're seeing that every major brand that they have worked with now has EVs and they're curious, right? They're trying to kind of make sense of it. Infrastructurally, I think BC is in a pretty good spot. There are a lot of charging infrastructures coming up. We're actually connected with a few charger infrastructure providers as well. So we're seeing growth happening at different paces. So definitely that ecosystem is quite vibrant.
Yeah, and one
Yeah.
of the things that's common, certainly, in the North American region, is the appetite to explore innovative solutions in the retailing space, whether they're AI driven, which has been a huge topic, but you know tools that can be brought into the space that can advance your business outcomes. The efficiency, operations, cost reduction. We've seen that consistent in both markets, which leads us to having conversations with many people in the space, which we're excited
Yeah.
And where are you guys on in terms of your roadmap, funding growth, launches, and what are some next steps for Cord?
about. Go ahead, Vish. I know when you.
I can give my perspective. So there is a product roadmap and then there's a company roadmap. Product wise, we're obviously going to go deep and wide on things that we do. Zoe's going to get more and more intelligent. She's already trained on 2,000, unique EVs, year, make, model trims. But also now there's an influx of Chinese vehicles that we're going to see at some point in time. We're already tracking a lot of the BYDs and the Great Walls and the Xiaomis of the world. So we're going to see a lot of that happening. So with that, our product is also going to evolve because data parameters are different. The way that data needs to be communicated is going to change, and people are just going to be more curious about Chinese vehicles. So that's one thing. From a company perspective, we're right now self-funded and we're kind of growing. Our whole revenue model right now is working with dealerships and auto groups on a SaaS model. So we're going to keep expanding on that as we add more. And at some point in time, I know for growth we will need capital, so we're kind of getting ready for that as well. Still early days, we're only a year old, and we're still sort of working through it. So there's a lot happening in the next few months, and we don't even measure it by years anymore in a startup. So it's definitely an exciting next chapter that we're looking forward to.
Yeah, and to add one thing that Joe, it's interesting because I spent a good deal yesterday looking at this. Is that from a product roadmap, we see so much value in putting these insights on the VDP because that's kind of fish where the fish are. That's the point of purchase. We're getting a lot of appetite in that. We're seeing a lot of gravity and expanding and extending kind of the insights that we provide relative to these outside of the VDP. How can we enable retailers to create an experience digitally that goes beyond the VDP, educates in a broader way with tools and calculators and engagement methods? So this is something we're also looking at very closely as we talk to customers.
Yeah.
Is the goal to also geographically kind of move into partnering with U.S. dealers and other retailers?
100%, it is, and our first step in that direction was, of course, partnering with Dealer On,
Okay.
as I've got a large kind of addressable market in the United States, and we expect a lot of activity there in the next few months, and have been talking to people in the U.S. So being in the U.S. myself here now, I plan to attend a lot of events where we'll be engaging with these automotive groups and kind of working with them to roll up our sleeves and kind of solve this problem.
Very good. Well, last question before I let you guys go. One of the things I noticed about a lot of these new companies in the EV space is just the clever ways in which they kind of do a play on words with the names of the companies. So if you'll allow me to venture a guess as to how the name Cord came about, is it because you guys kind of want to keep the customer plugged in to information just like a cord? Am I on the right track?
It's such an interesting question. I knew that at some point somebody was going to ask me this. This isn't the way I look at it, Joe. Is that it can be interpreted different ways, but the way I look at it is cord. By virtue of a cord, it's something to connect things.
Yeah.
The way I look at cord is we have the ability to connect insights to customers, and that is kind of the embodiment of cord to support automotive resale.
Very good.
Unlike a cord that goes into plugging the car.
Yeah.
We
Well,
connect
guys,
data and insights. Yeah.
we'll leave it there for today. Vish, AJ, great talking with you, and thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Joe. Nice speaking with you.
Thanks for having us on. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Well, that'll do it for today's episode of the Auto Remarketing Podcast. I'm Joe Overby. Thanks for listening.